Opening slide, graphic, text, title. The role of job coach with Milton Tyree. Image of Milton Tyree. Logos, belonging matters, and talksthatmatter.net.
It's really nice to be here, so thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started. So, it's great getting to work again with you all, Deb, Pat, and Jenny. I got to learn a little bit about your Rotary initiative, your Rotary Community Employment Project last May. And so before I start with this presentation on the multifaceted role of the job coach, promoting connections, commonality, and competence, I want to say just a little bit more about how I came to be interested in employment, the field of open employment. We call this supported employment in the US, and I know that means something else in Australia, so I'll do my best to say open employment and not supported employment. But prior to my work in open employment, I was a high school special education teacher. And then after that, I was a supervisor at a sheltered workshop, what you all call disability enterprises. And it was these experiences as a special ed teacher and a sheltered workshop supervisor that led to my work in open employment and my interest in it, just seeing the importance of people with disabilities working where everybody else works, having the same opportunities for a purposeful life, contributing to society. And as Jenny, or as Pat said, the two primary formational pieces of my learning have been through my affiliation with Mark Golden Associates and also my opportunities to learn and teach social role valorization theory. And so the content for this morning is derived from both SRV theory as well as discovery and systematic instruction as developed by Mark Golden Associates. So I'll be sharing things I've learned from other professionals as well as other people with disabilities and their family members and business people, hoping that the things I've learned will also be helpful to you. So this is how I've organized the time today. Most of our time will be on this first item. What I think of is the big three changes, the big three shifts that I've seen in open employment since 1981. And then we'll look briefly at implications for having the right person and with the right professional development as the job coach. And I'm going to be certain that we have at least 30 minutes for questions and discussion. Also, I'm going to make a PDF file of all of the slides that I show in this presentation, and I'll give that to Pat, Deb, and Jenny so they can share it with anybody who's interested. So you don't have to be writing down something. If you see it and you like it, you'll get copies of the slides later on. You know, the name of your project, Community Employment, or at least that part of it, really resonates with me because it was a parent-teacher group that started the private nonprofit in 1981, where I got to start working in open employment, and it was called Community Employment. So that rings very familiar to my ears. All right, well, let's go ahead and look through these three big changes. So these three big shifts in employment is where I want to spend most of my time. These are really closely interrelated, and they all deal with like what the job coach person does. And of course, this is a role where I got to work myself quite a bit. Don't get to so much anymore. But this idea of starting with the person and not the job, that's been one of the big changes. The next one is determining the proper role of the job coach for on-the-job instruction and support, and using, as you referenced, Jackie, natural supports as much as possible. So we'll talk about some of the rules for that and the framework for thinking about that. And then the last big change has been looking at negotiating fitting jobs that are advantageous both to the job candidate who has a disability and also to the business where they work, rather than just relying entirely on jobs that are posted or available jobs. So those are the three big changes that, to me, have opened up a lot of possibilities that weren't around prior to this. So we'll start with this idea of starting with the person and not the job. This is what I think of as the first big shift. As open employment evolved, we've gotten a lot better around this idea of job fit. And I'm going to briefly describe the process of discovery. This is something with it that itself has been evolving now for 30 years or more, actually, probably about 35 years. And it's been instrumental in determining job fit, starting with the job and not the person. Because if somebody is in a job that really isn't a fit for them, it makes people appear to be incompetent. And whereas a fitting job sets the stage for people to contribute to purposeful work. So here's a couple of photos of a job. And this is not an arbitrary job placement, but this was rather a negotiated job or a customized job that involved significant exploration through discovery, learning, and planning with both Daniel, the young man you see sitting in the office, and Dr. Lahaki, whose office he worked in. Now, this is as opposed to what we did when I first got started in the work, because in 1981, we did not know about discovery. It wasn't a thing yet. So we did what we knew, which is, I think that's what most people do. They do the best with what they know. And what we knew at that time was asking people what they wanted to do or testing them on some kind of standardized vocational test. So this is an early 1980s photo of Jim washing dishes and his job coach, Jorana, observing him. And when we met Jim, he had just completed his schooling at a special ed school where all of the other students had disabilities. Now, Jim had a job at the school working in the cafeteria, and it was his job to wash trays through and run them through the dishwasher, just trays that they used at the cafeteria for meals. And so he ran the trays through the dishwasher, took them out, dried them, and stacked them for use again. That was his job. So when I asked Jim the question, what do you want to do? What do you suppose his answer was? It's what was familiar to him. And so he said that he wanted to wash dishes. Now, in discovery, we would have been interested in learning about his job washing dishes. We wouldn't have said, what do you want to do? Because we don't ask that question anymore. It's just too loaded of a question to ask. But if he had told us, he wanted to wash dishes, we'd say, well, we'd really like to learn about that. But we want to learn about a lot of other things too. So early on, that's the best we knew how to do. Now, discovery has been developing since about 1988. And we've learned more and more about it and nuance around it and how better to do it over time. But it's a common sense process that involves getting to know people and people getting to know themselves before developing any kind of plan about what work would look like. It involves spending time with people and learning with people. Who is this person? Instead of testing or evaluating like we used to do. So I'll talk a little bit about interests related to work, conditions that need to be in place for people to be at their best, and contributions. These are the three areas that we're really focused on in the process of discovery. And all of this builds on preparing for job development. What would a good job look like? What are its characteristics? How would we know it when we see it? And how would we go about designing it based on what was learned in discovery? So in summary, discovery is, instead of testing, it's instead of merely asking people, what do you want to do? Or just placing people in a predetermined job or a readily available job or in a readiness sort of a program. Now, one of the really important principles of discovery is this idea around contribution versus competition. Because we live in a hyper competitive world. not just competitive sports either. It's like you just turn on the TV, all of the competitive reality shows, who can cook the best meal. And not only that, who can cook the best meal faster than anybody else? Who can survive on the island while others are sent home? So we also have this thing that we call competitive employment. Who gets selected for the job above all the people who weren't selected? And for many people with disabilities, this notion of competitive employment has left them on the sidelines, either entirely unemployed or underemployed, sometimes in jobs that most people don't want to do. Well, it doesn't have to be this way, because people with disabilities don't need to compete to have access to the good things of life, belonging and contributing and working in purposeful, fitting work. They need to contribute, and everybody has something to contribute. But for many people, what it is they have to contribute has been unrecognized or minimized, and not enough attention has been paid to it. So discovery is one of the ways where we recognize people's contributions, what they have to offer. And, the many ways that expresses itself, certainly people's skills, but also their personality characteristics, their life experiences, their passions, their knowledge. What do they bring to the table? So we're looking for contribution, not competition. Now, this is just a little graphic that shows the intersection of these three basic characteristics, conditions. So this has to do with lots of things, like who were people's coworkers? Like, what age are they, and what are their personalities like, and what is their consistency on the job? That would just be some of the examples around people conditions. What is the environment like where they work? What is the nature of the task they perform, and not just their interest in the task, but actually something you were talking about earlier, Deb, before the call, like are the tasks primarily tasks that are have a range of correctness, or tasks that are, pretty much one way, you can tell when they're done, they have a clear range of correctness. All kinds of things around conditions that you learn about people in the process of discovery. And then what kinds of things are people interested in, and how that can relate to work, because that makes a difference for all of us, doesn't it? If we're doing work where that is of interest to us, that we see as important, it's making a difference what we're doing, and what it is that people have to contribute, that I just talked a bit about. And as much as possible, we're looking for this sweet spot, this intersection, where all three of them would fit together. And I put this little blue box up in the corner. This relates a lot to what I've learned in social role valorization theory. In the whole range of possibilities, we're always searching for the most valued, starting with the best of possibilities. And we're not just imagining what we've seen, but what could be in place based on what we've observed and seen. Now, I'm going to show just a little bit of a story, my first experience in discovery, because I learned so much from this experience. And just to give an example of how it works. And then I'm going to also just quickly explain a more recent example I've had in discovery, because this one goes back, more than 30 years. But Tim was a young man I met when he was a high school student. Now, he was a student in the class that I used to teach when I was a high school teacher, but he was not a student when I was a teacher. And the high school got in touch with me because they wanted to set up a work program for students, which of course was a really good idea. And so I agreed to assist them. And Tim was one of the students who was served in that, we called it work transition program, transition from school to work. Now, what we did there was we started, and this was my idea, by the way, we started with predetermined jobs. So we were not starting with the person, we were starting with the job. Just some, businesses that were pretty close to the school, like this was Shaw's Grocery, where Tim was placed. Really nice people, the Shaws, mom and pop grocery, close to the school. It was a really nice partnership for the school to have, and very positive in that regard. But it really wasn't very good for Tim, because it did not show Tim at his best. These were some things that we learned about Tim when he worked at Shaw's Grocery. Now, y'all may have heard this first one said about other people, you know. What we said about Tim, me and others, from his experience at Shaw's Grocery was that he was always going to need a job coach. He's one of these people we could not envision working without a job coach, because the job coach, and her name was Nancy, was always providing supervision or prompts for Tim to keep him going on the job. Otherwise, he just, wouldn't work, or he'd get distracted and do something else, which was the next thing, that we noticed that he had a really short attention span, just kind of a guy on the move all the time. And it's kind of hard to get him centered on, the tasks that had been identified for him. He wasn't real good about watching out for danger. So another reason we thought somebody needs to be with him, because it had to cross a little street. This is Buckner, Kentucky, out in the country, but still you got to watch for cars. And Tim just would kind of dart around and wasn't real careful about watching out for dangers. And another thing that was something that we noticed that made it challenging for a lot of people to be with Tim was he just talked so much. And he talked so much, it was kind of hard to attend to what he was saying, and one of these people took a lot of energy to be with. So what happened after 1987, when I met Tim and got this program going, and I had these really poor expectations in my head, sadly, about Tim, is that I was offered a job to go to the University of Kentucky, where I still work part-time, and to develop a professional development program around what we called supported employment, what you call open employment. And this was really a tremendous opportunity for me to meet the leaders and the developers in the field of what we call supported employment. Just a time for reading and study and meeting people. And so one of the people I met was Mike Callahan, who was president of Mark Gold and Associates. Mark Gold had tragically died of cancer just 6 years earlier. And Mike had published this book, and I read the book, and I was just, I was just spellbound by it. It was just so full of helpful information. But one of the most important things, this is a picture of Mike over on the right, and Mike and Scott. Mike is the man over on the right. And so I was spellbound by it. But one of the most important things for me in the book was that it talked about the vocational profile, which became Discovery at Mark Gold and Associates. It was a way of getting to know people other than testing them. And so I got in touch with Mike and convinced him to work with me in developing the curriculum and the teaching that I was responsible for doing at the university. Now, so what happened after that, like 3 years later, was I got really restless at the university because I was learning all of these things, like about Discovery, that I had never done before. And not only that, I was in a position where I was teaching things that I thought were fabulous, but I'd never done them. So I left the university and I went back to working in direct services. I started my own small business. And guess who the first person referred to me was? Tim. And of course, Tim was the guy that, I had believed all of these really unhelpful things about. So it was really good that he was referred to me. And so I met with Tim and his mom, and I asked them, to forgive me for just placing him in a job. I knew it hadn't worked out very well for him, but I told them that I'd learned a lot of new ways of working with people that had a lot better likelihood of helping find a job that would be a good fit. And so they were very gracious. And so I had this new set of questions other than where can we place Tim? And so one of the things was about these questions where they were challenging things that I already had in my head. that needed to be disproven. Because, I mean, Tim has to sit still sometimes. This idea of he never sits still just, didn't really make sense. So, um, what are circumstances where Tim does stay with something without somebody lording over him to make him stay with it? And I thought, well, some of this would have to do with interest, and some of it would have to do with conditions, I bet. And I was really intrigued by one of the things that his sister had told me about, that she disliked a lot, and I understand why. But that Tim would take electronic devices, and when nobody was looking, he would disassemble them. And so I thought, well, he has to be sitting still when he's doing that. What other times would he also be engaged in something? And one of the things Mark Gold used to talk about, and I'd had a chance to study a lot about Mark's work over those 3 years, and he used to talk a lot about intrinsic interest. What kinds of things do people do when nobody, nobody notices them doing it even, and so I knew that was one of the things for Tim, was taking apart people's electronic devices. So under what conditions is Tim attentive to danger? What would it take for him to watch out for danger? What does that look like? What are his interests and talents? Who are other people who'd be interested in finding new stories about Tim? What brings out the employee in Tim? Let's get rid of all of the stuff. We know stuff that doesn't work. So what would work for Tim? And so in discovery, we start off by just beginning with people and typical aspects of everyday life. So I always ask people the question. I don't say, what would you want to do? I say, what are some things that you're good at doing and enjoy doing? And can I join you? Can you show me what they are? So a couple of things that I did with Tim. Got to do lots of things, but these were a couple of things. His mom said that he did a lot of taking care of the lawn, and he was using the weed trimmer and planting some flowers that week. And I said, can I come join you? And also that he helped his mom with grocery shopping. So I joined on that. I learned a lot through both of those. And because of the shortness of time we have, I'm not going to go into detail there. But just to say here that at the beginning of discovery, we want to just spend time with people doing what they do in ordinary life, with a focus on things that they enjoy doing and do well, so that we can be dissecting that and thinking about what is in place for this. And then we move toward novel activities based on what's been learned. So some of the things that I was learning about Tim was he seemed to have some mechanical interest and aptitude. And so these are pre-planned activities that have a likelihood of being a positive experience for people, even though they're new. It's not a test, but an exploration. So a couple of things that I did with Tim, I asked him to help me rewire some shop lights, and that worked pretty nicely. And sure enough, he was right there and focused. One of the things he used to always talk about was computers, wanting to work on computers. Now, Tim had learned a lot about reading and stuff like that, but he seemed really intrigued with computers. And sure enough, I found a task to perform at somebody's office doing some data entry. And he sat with me and I taught him how to do the data entry. And he was right there, like an hour and a half, didn't get up. So what that was telling me was not that he should do data entry necessarily, but if it's a task that Tim is challenged by and is engaged by, that sure enough, he will stick with it. Now, the one that I do want to talk about is an introduction to Bill. This kind of goes back to this idea of finding other allies and exploring things with Tim. And I was particularly interested in this mechanical stuff. So here's the story around Bill. You see Bill standing next to this old Volkswagen bus. Well, I've owned a couple of these in my past. And Bill was my Volkswagen mechanic, and he was a genius mechanic. And so he lived 5 houses down from Tim, and his garage was in his backyard. And so, Bill knew what I did for a living. And I said, I'm helping a young man. I don't know if you've met him or not, but he lives right around the corner from you there. He said, no, I don't know. I don't know him, Tim. And I said, well, I'd like you to meet him if you would, because I think he has some mechanical ability. And I don't have a lot of that. You do. You're a mechanical genius, Are you doing anything around the shop that you might show Tim? So you could kind of tell me what you think about about Tim, or maybe something you're working on that he could help you work on. And he said, well, I'm rebuilding a riding lawnmower. I'd be glad to have him help me. So I introduced them. They rebuilt the riding lawnmower together. I was there sometimes when they worked on it, and sometimes I wasn't. And sometimes I would just kind of work in Bill's garage, like tidying up or something while he was working with Tim. But he affirmed that Tim really seemed to be good working with tools, working with mechanical things. And he said, yeah, I could see this being good work for Tim. So just to cut to the chase here, just some of the things learned about Tim are related to interest. This thing about mechanical, electrical, assembly, and disassembly just seemed to be a really strong interest. And not only that, but an innate ability of his. Nobody kind of knows how we learned it or got it, but it was something really attractive to him. And so these conditions around Tim, one of the things that I learned was that he did really well with tasks that had clear parameters, a job where he can see whether the job is completed or not. And he didn't do so well with tasks that were never ending, like cleaning or sweeping or rotating stock on shelves or things like that. The job shouldn't have excessive downtime because he wanted to stay busy, something other people wouldn't see as busy. And I put that there because of me, because of my low expectations for him, And so people would look at Tim and they may not expect that he could do something pretty complicated. Talking should be part of the job, not a quiet place, because he's a man who talks a lot. A small, consistent group of coworkers, good model workers, people who could inform him of danger, people who would get to know Tim and appreciate what he could do, and then give him more of that to do. So if he wasn't somebody who could have coworkers changing all the time or supervisors changing. He needed a laid back workplace because, Tim was pretty wired pretty hot, and so he needed people who were pretty laid back to be with him. And a job that needed to be close to home because his mom was a single mom and she worked several jobs to keep food on the table. His contributions, his mechanical aptitude, his strong work ethic, his physical energy, and just one of the most completely authentic, transparent, genuine people I've ever met in my life. Just a wonderful man. And so anyhow, he ended up getting a job doing just that and doing mechanical assembly at a company called Product Handling Equipment in Buckner. It was a small, consistent workforce, very low turnover. Everybody did everything from sweeping the floor when they needed to building sub-assemblies like Tim is doing in this photo. Everybody there drove the forklift, painted, the assembled conveyors, worked in the paint booth, all kinds of things. Now, so what I was looking at for Tim was work doing sub-assemblies. And so I identified one of these when I was looking at the job and proposed that he would be really good at doing this. And so here he is doing this first sub-assembly that he learned to do at Product Handling Equipment. The man, Robert, sitting behind him is the person who taught Tim how to do the job. And I'll have more to say about that in just a minute. Now, the other person who I'll be referencing a little bit in these next 20 minutes, his name is Sam. And Sam is the most recent person I've had a chance to work with in Discovery. And this goes back about 7 years. So it's been a little while since I've had a chance to do this. Interestingly, I kind of got to know him at the same stage that I got to know Tim because he was in a work transition program in a high school. And he was struggling some in that program. And his mom called me and asked me if I could come work with Sam and the people at school. And I did. And he got some work in the work transition program. And then he got out of school and needed somebody to help him find a job. So I got to help him find a job too. So just around interests, I learned about interest, conditions, and contributions with Sam, but his interests were really strong around horses and cars. And so those were the two areas where we were looking for work. And I'll come back to him in just a second. So the first big shift was starting with the person, not the job. And you can see the difference that made for Tim. Like working at Shaw's Grocery, where he always had to have a job coach telling him what to do, to working at Product Handling Equipment, where I was his job coach and I didn't teach him to do anything there. Robert taught him to do everything. But the key is the job was a really good fit for him. So now we're going to look at this idea of determining the proper role for the job coach. This was the second big change in open employment. And here's another picture of Sam. Sam worked in 2 part-time jobs. I also assisted him to get a job on days he wasn't working at Saddle Lake Equestrian to work at McDine's Auto Body. And here he is with Keith McDine. So this idea around deciding who teaches the job and how is that determined is something else, which is something of a second generation issue. However, this one is also 35 years old. This idea around the term natural supports is 35 years old. A lot more has been learned about it, a lot of its nuances and ways to help determine this. But basically, it involves initially, after tasks are identified, both of these jobs for Sam were customized jobs at McDine's and also at Saddle Lake Equestrian. After the tasks are determined, I ask people at those places to show me how they teach the tasks. And I know the person, I know Sam in this instance. And we figure out then how Sam will learn those tasks, learning it from people who do the teaching as much as possible. So here Keith is, who owns the shop, teaching Sam these body finishing tasks that Sam did there. Now, what we used to do was to take over instruction. So here's Jim and Jorana again. Jim was hired as a dishwasher at Barrister's Restaurant. Jorana, who worked with me at Community Employment, provided all of his training, and she gradually faded. And, Jim learned the job. But this is interesting. This idea around what was Jim's primary identity at the job. So, Sharon, you were talking, Sharon, you were talking about, just the importance of the role of employee and how much people seeing themselves as an employee and how that helped your son blossom and develop interest in learning other kinds of things and so forth. So the role of employee in SRB theory is one of those really big roles because it has so much to do with other people we know and things we're learning and so forth. So Jim having the role of employee is really important. Now, there's another role that he was in. He was an employee of Barrister's Restaurant. But looking back on this, I keep thinking, when we just took over instruction the way we did for Jim on this job, he also was very powerfully in the client role, like the community employment client role. Now, we know from social role valorization theory that being a human service client is not a valued role. Depending on its context, it might be a negative role. At best, it's going to be a neutral role. So part of my thinking about all of this, after I got to learn about social role valorization theory and natural supports, is that we want people's predominant role to be that of employee because it's so big and it's so powerful. And we want their smaller role to be as our client. And this idea of looking at how people typically learn jobs and using that as much as possible really helps that to take place. So the way we think about this at Mark Golden Associates is we look at what is, over on the right, what is generically valid, what happens most of the time for most people, how do new employees typically learn these tasks, and what does the learner need to have in place? And then we want to balance that. We're not going to just abandon people and say the employer has to provide all the training, but we want the employer to provide as much of the training as possible. And so with Tim, that was Robert. And I really didn't need to provide any training for him. But one of the things we teach is that it is important for the job coach to be there when the person starts learning. So if they do have difficulty learning, you can be there as a backup to offer ideas on, well, maybe here, let's try this, And some of the reasons I needed to be there was just to help Tim make connections with people and learn how to take breaks with people and things like that. But in terms of learning how to do the task, Robert taught him how to do that. Same thing with Sam. This is Mike. So Mike taught me how he taught people to do the tasks that Sam does at Saddle Lake Equestrian. And I said, oh, I think you're a fabulous teacher. I think that'll work great for Sam. Now, I was there while Sam was learning, and I would check in with them from time to time to see how it was going. And I was there for multiple days. But, and the same with Keith teaching Sam here. So it's not like I wasn't there or I wasn't seeing how it was going. So you could say, well, in a way, Sam and Tim were still in a client role. They were. But the really big role that dwarfed the client role was the role of employee, which helps in all kinds of ways for people to become, assimilated in the workforce and respected as an employee. And I'm seen more as a consultant, which is what I call myself, an advisor or a consultant on the job, rather than, I don't call myself a job coach, actually. I'd say, well, if people would say, well, who are you to Sam? I would say I'm his advisor or his consultant. Sam called me his agent, because he saw me as the person kind of helping put things together. So that's the second big shift. Now, the third one has been negotiating fitting jobs for people. So as open employment evolved, there's been more focus on job flexibility, negotiating jobs. After we know somebody in discovery, what is it they have to offer to a company? And how can we make that advantageous to the company and a good job for the person? So here's a photo of Gabby. Now, Gabby, when she left school, ended up working or being in a day program. Not really, she didn't have work there, but she was in a day program for people with disabilities. But then she wanted to work in open employment. She worked with Mary Reed, who was her job coach, or employment specialist is what Mary Reed calls herself, I think, who assisted her in discovery and got to learn about things that Gabby was good at doing. And these are actually a couple of customized jobs Gabby's worked in. The one over on the left is at a company called Eventualities, and on the right is Eagle Eye Strategies. So this is in contrast to what we did when the best we knew was looking for open jobs. And so this is a picture of Jim and Jorana again, this time with Jim getting an interview from Barry, the owner of Barristers, because we used to fill job openings. But for many people, filling job openings proves to be limiting, either in terms of the quality of jobs people are getting or the fit of the job, so that so many people end up being either underemployed or unemployed. So we came up with this idea of customized employment. This goes back, I guess, 2001 in the US is really when we started talking about customized employment. But like everything else, our understanding has developed and grown over time, so we know a lot more about it. So for instance, what I'm going to show you here is a relatively new iteration of customized employment, the way we think about it at Mark Gold and Associates. This probably goes back, I guess, to like 2014 or something. So we look at three primary areas in a business when we're looking for a customized job. Now, we've already gotten to know somebody in discovery, and now we're we're honing in on a targeted business, a business that's been identified as likely to have the kinds of tasks that we're seeking. And we're focusing in on what employees do, what happens within the work setting, and what is it the customers do. And we look at balancing the equation. That's why I have the scales in the middle there. On the job candidate side, what is it that we want to see them getting? Well, tasks and a job that meets their conditions for work. What needs to be in place for that person to be at his best? That also connects with their interest related to work and what it is that they have to contribute. Then on the business side, what we're looking for are unmet needs that the business has, or tasks that particularly enhance the business that are a fit for the person we're representing. They may be new tasks even, and tasks better performed by others. So here's an example of Gabby. And I'm going to focus on her job over at Eagle Eye Strategies. One of the things that was learned in discovery about Gabby was that she was really good at digital photos and arranging them. She was really good at, like a lot of young people are, at social media kinds of things. And so Mary Reed, her employment specialist or job coach, helped Gabby to get a job or I'm sorry, assisted Gabby to take some training in digital design at community college so that she had some skills, around particular kinds of software that she could use and work. And then Mary Reed met Christy, who owns Eagle Eye Strategies. It's a PR company through the Chamber of Commerce, where she's a member. And we're just talking to her about Gabby, and she said, she's really cool with digital stuff. And Mary Reed spent time with Christy, found out all of these digital kinds of creation things that she was doing with Photoshop and Canva and Ripple and Facebook Business Suite, things that I don't have any idea how they work, but Gabby did. And so she said to Christy, would it be helpful if you had somebody come do these things for you that are relatively rudimentary things for you, but they need to get done so that you could spend more time building your business? And Christy said that'd be fabulous. So it's a task better performed by others, tasks that already existed, but better performed by others. So that is one example there. And the last topic that I want to be sure and cover, I see we just have 5 minutes left, is this idea around the multifaceted job of the job coach. And there are all of these things, that I've just kind of thrown at you in 40 minutes that a job coach needs to do. And part of it comes down to these personal characteristics that people have and the roles that come from that. So this is a picture of Julia Shoemaker. She's a job supporter from Canberra, whom I've had a chance to meet in Australia. And these these 8 characteristics are actually taken from a document called Customized Employment Competency Model, and the different knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics that it determined that a customized employment job developer needs. But, optimism, openness, positive outlook, adaptable to change, being goal-oriented, having research ability, skilled in gathering information and applying it, and so forth. This is the document that actually these came from. It's at the core of this idea of what is a customized employment specialist and what kinds of skills does this person need to have. And I can provide this document. I'd be glad to send this to Jenny and Pat and Deb when we're finished, if anybody would like to look at it. It was written by a PR company, actually, for the United States Department of Labor, called ICF is the company that wrote this, but it was through a study that was put out by the United States Department of Labor. And this is a graphic diagram of all of the kinds of things that employment specialists need to know. Now, this is actually a slide that I used in Canberra at a training there around tips for the job supporter and fading the job supporter, because it's something that everybody always is interested in. And I say, well, if you've done your upfront work and you've worked with somebody in discovery, then you can relax when the job starts, because first of all, it's going to be a fit for the person because it fits what you learned about the person in discovery. And you've devoted the upfront time to know this person. You've devoted the upfront time to know the people in the business and know how they teach. And you know the job candidate, and you're sure that they meet their immediate coworkers and supervisors before the first day of work. So these are all the things to think about ahead of time. You know the culture of the business, you know what typical instruction looks like, and you know about instruction yourself. If the typical instruction isn't working the way you all planned, then you're there as an advisor or a consultant, and you can help problem solve. The business is well aware of your role as a consultant, as an advisor, and possibly an instructor from time to time, and where you will be available, how you will be available, And so when you're there on the first day of work, everybody knows why you're there. You're there to observe, to see how instruction works, or maybe provide some of it yourself, if that's what's been determined. They know where you're going to be, like in the break room, or what days you're going to be showing up, or how to get in touch with you if they need to get in touch with you. So in other words, my way of looking at it is you spend the time up front to know the person, to know the business, and to know the people, all of the relational stuff. So the first day of work anxiety is significantly lowered for everyone. It's like, oh, well, I can see how this is going to work. We used to just ask people what they wanted to do or test them. And for a lot of people, that just didn't work out very well. And we would start with the job and not the person. What we used to call, back in the day, place and pray. Well, I sure hope it works. And sometimes it would, but overall, it didn't have the greatest success rate either. We used to be limited by what I call labor market job descriptions, just what are posted job descriptions. And sure enough, that worked for some people, but for many people, it proved to be limiting. Either they had a job that was just not the right job for them, too easy or not of interest, or a lot of people ended up being unemployed. We were unclear about the proper role of the job coach or job mentor or whatever you call yourself, advisor. And this caused a lot of confusion for everybody. Like, who are you? Why are you here? I usually teach people, so why are you here? And so it was just kind of a confusing role, the way we used to think about it at community employment, my community employment, where I worked. And these relationships were centered on doing things for people or doing things to people, really, which just perpetuated people's dependency and isolation. So we found better ways. Now, it's interesting to say we weren't doing these ways because we wanted bad things for people. I very much wanted good things for people when I was doing these things. It was the best that I knew, and now we know better, and we will know better than these ways later on. But this is the best, at least, that I know about right now, and there may well be better ways than this. But learning about people's conditions, interests, and contributions offered to business using discovery, that's the start. Start with the person instead of the job. And then negotiate jobs that are a mutual benefit for the business and also that are a good fit for the person you're representing. And instead of taking over instruction like we used to do, by practice, just what we did, that we study typical and valued practices already in place, how any new employee would learn that, who teaches them. And that's not always going to work for everybody. We may need to make some adaptations, but we use that as much as possible. And that helps put people solidly in the role of employee of the business. And businesses then figure out things. So we're not always the people figuring things out, because businesses all the time figure out problem solving, things that are problems for their employees. It helps people get centered in that employee role. And this helps develop balanced and reciprocal relationships with people we're supporting. So I'm going to end there. Oh, I want to show you this quote. This is a Maya Angelou quote that I like. This gives me some comfort in the things that I've done because I didn't know any better. Do the best you can until you know better. But then when you know better, do better.
Closing slide graphic text. With thanks to Milton Tyree. Produced by Belonging Matters. Belonging Matters makes every effort to provide accurate and up-to-date material. However, information is subject to change and our materials for reference only. This video was made possible with the support of an information and capacity building grant through the Department of Social Services. This video was produced on the land of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. Logos, Belonging Matters, and TalksThatMatter.net.